So how do you see the relationship with our inner judge or inner critic or superego and essence?
Yes, this is a very big discussion, and I want to go into some details with you. First of all, I want to say that the superego, as we call it, is part of our bigger constellation. It's part of our personality, and it's a very necessary part because it is the part that regulates our personality. Our ego is what our parents wanted us to be. And then there is another agent in our system, in the totality of our system, that we call superego, which is again some internalized voices of our parents that are safeguarding and regulating the function of our ego. So now the superego has at least two different parts. One is a healthy superego and the other is the toxic superego. So the healthy superego is the internalized voices of our parents that are loving, caring, well regulating us. They eventually become the voice of our conscience. And we need to have our conscience developed in a good way. And this is part is safeguarding our regulation and our functioning in this world. And then there is the toxic superego, the toxic voices of our parents that we have internalized, that are not just simply caring for us, but are having certain toxicity. And their work is to make sure that we never go away from that ego, that persona that we internalize, that we identify with, which is what our parents want us to be. I give you an example. So the caring superego is that voice of our parents that we internalize that is loving and caring. Sweetheart, you will be cold, put your jacket on. Caring, loving voice. And eventually this voice becomes a care towards ourselves. We care about us. We love ourselves. In a healthy way, we take care of ourselves. And then there is the toxic voice that we internalized, like you are stupid, or what are you doing there? You are not doing anything useful. Who do you think you are? Etc. And then that toxic voice, that imprint is safeguarding the egotistical personality, which is the role we identified with in our conditioning, the way we get conditioned by our parents in a negative way. So instead of this safeguarding now something healthy within us, it is keeping us into a certain role, into a certain identity, which is unhealthy. And as you said, it has different forms. The inner critic, the pusher inside of us, the one that commands us, the other one that is blaming us inside. It has different voices, it appears in different ways. And in fact, we are giving it all the power. We are nourishing this toxic part, believing that we need it the way it is. We are nourishing it with all our essences. And in fact, the first use, the initial use of the superego was or is to protect us. This part wants to make sure that when we are in difficult situations, when we become vulnerable, when our little child self, our vulnerable self, comes up in certain situations, the superego self wants to make sure that this part of us will be protected So we will not be embarrassed, we will not feel unsafe, we will not be exposed, we will not be humiliated. Yeah? And in fact, we give to the toxic superego all our essences. We nourish it. So now the toxic superego that is regulating our ego, that is the role that we play, the identity that we have taken due to our conditioning, it is like the Goliath. It is huge now because we give it all our essence. I want to talk a little bit about the process of how the superego is formated or formed. So, in the beginning, we internalize the voices of our parents. From the beginning, we need to internalize the voices of our parents because having them inside makes us feel more secure. Also, when they are not there, when we go play with our friends when we are children, we have them inside of us slowly. So that makes us more independent because when we have them inside of us, we feel their presence, so we can start becoming more independent. We need to internalize their voices. But of course, as we said, we internalize not only the helpful, the beautiful, the caring voices, the loving voices, we internalize also the toxic voices. And this is the mess. So we internalize their voices, so that makes us more independent in the first place. And until certain age, maybe 11, 12, we keep internalizing. We want to fill up with our presence, even though a big part of it is toxic. Then comes the process of puberty. In the process of puberty, where the hormones kick in the child and there is rebelliousness and fight and clashes with the parents, in terms of the superego process, what the child or the teenager has to do, has to sort out the superego inputs and sort out the toxic parts and drop them and keep the healthy parts of the superego, so to say, to create an autonomous superego that will help the person at some point to become an adult, to become independent, to have his own autonomous superego and create a voice of conscience, which is the true regulator of the personality. But unfortunately, nobody of us manages to do this process supposed to do it until 18 years old. So the process continues and we remain, unfortunately, teenagers in rebellion for a long time. So what we have to do now, we have to integrate a process that's supposed to have started and finished by 18 years old. But now we are continuing to do that, to try to sort out what is the toxic superego and keep the healthy superego within us and see what it is good, what is doing good for us, keep it in order to become more and more clean in our conscience. But now, unfortunately, we end up being in this situation and our toxic superego is like the Goliath and we keep feeding it with all our essences and we believe that this part of our constellation will protect us when we are sensitive, when we are regressed, when we become vulnerable, and our child, our wounded and vulnerable child, shows up. Because there are situations in our lives that this part of ourselves is coming up. Because this part is there, even though we don't feel it all the time. But we get confronted in certain moments in our daily life that we feel vulnerable and we partially regress. And we are not anymore standing in our adult self, knowing how to do things, being secure, being safe, feeling safe, and moving in the world as a real adult. So in those moments, superego comes in, which is the toxic voices of our parents, and trying to take the lead and the regulation in our system to protect our vulnerable child. And in fact, it's not really protecting it. It is humiliating us, putting us down, make us feel even smaller. And we give all our beautiful essences to it, to make it even stronger. So in those moments, there is a division inside of us. A part of us is very regressed into a wounded child that needs protection. And there's this other part of our structure, the toxic superego, that takes over in order to protect itself.